Hey folks, Charlie in Westeros here, and I'm back with a little bit of a different video for a change. While I'm still in the process of still preparing my video series on Rhaegar Targaryen, the question of the Others, or White Walkers as they are popularly known in the show, and their seemingly contrary existence to the Valyrians is something that has been bothering me for some time. While the show seems to have addressed their origins, I figured this was a perfect time to explore the reality of the origins of the White Walkers a little more. Now, certainly one could argue that there is no real relationship between the two entities, and that it is entirely possible that their respective existences in the series are completely unrelated. That said, there are some elements I would like to look at, and see if there aren't some ties that can be made between these two enigmatic groups in the universe of Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Note that while much of the information I present here was retrieved from the World of Ice and Fire book, as well as the A Song of Ice and Fire wiki, the fantastic posts and information shared on forums, and on one video in particular, were instrumental in my thought process, and I have shared these sources in the info box below, and I absolutely encourage you to check them out. Anyway, without further ado, here are some facts and my thoughts on the intriguing contrast between the White Walkers and the Valyrians. Some time ago, Alt-Shift-X made a terrific video on the White Walkers, and there was one point he touched on that I think is very telling. For a start, the point was made that if we look at the known world of A Song of Ice and Fire as spherical, the apparent homelands of the Others and the Valyrians are respectively located at polar opposite locations on maps of Westeros and Essos. Moreover, it would seem that the land of Always Winter, the apparent refuge of the White Walkers, is described as a place permanently locked in winter and perpetually frozen as well as largely unexplored. Meanwhile, contemporary Valyria borders a territory intriguingly named the Lands of the Long Summer to the north and the Summer Sea to the south. Naturally, this places Valyria at the epicenter of landmarks with the name of summer in their titles, and this is undoubtedly the first point of seasonal comparison between the home territories of the Others and the Valyrians. It is also interesting to note that Tyrion describes the Doom of Valyria in the following manner.
The proudest city in all the world was gone in an instant. Its fabled empire vanished in a day. The lands of the long summer scorched and drowned and blighted. An empire built on blood and fire. The Valerians reaped the seed they had sown.
On the other hand, when the apex of White Walker control came to Westeros, it was intriguingly called the Long Night, a terrible darkness which fell across the known world. It lasted a generation and laid waste through famine and terror in the midst of a great winter that lasted for years.
Thousands of years ago, there came a night that lasted a generation. Kings froze to death in their castles, same as the shepherds in their huts. And women smothered their babies rather than see them starve.
Now, as far as the books are concerned, the Others supposedly returned to the Land of Always Winter, an area impenetrable to the average man. It is particularly interesting that their apparent doom emphasizes the fact that they reside in an area where humans cannot access, just as the Doom of Valyria, by fire, is now inaccessible to almost any who would try to reach the land there. Although both peoples seem to either be or have at least originated from humans, it is their respective unique appearances that make the Valyrians and the Others stand out from the rest of humanity. In one email to a comic book artist, George R. R. Martin wrote that, quote, "The Others are not dead. They are strange, beautiful. Think, oh, the she made of ice," something like that. A different sort of life. Inhuman, elegant, dangerous. Although quite different in appearance, yet in an oddly similar way, the Valyrians are famous for having silver gold hair and violet purple eyes, characteristics not found amongst any other peoples of the world. This can vary from white to silver gold to blonde hair, and from lilac to deep purple and pale blue eyes. However, what is most noteworthy is that the most noble of Valyrians were considered strikingly, some say inhumanely, beautiful. While it is known how the original humans were transformed into the White Walkers, it is still unknown as to how or even if the original Valyrians looked like most of the other known peoples of Westeros and Essos, or if they underwent a potential magical transformation to obtain their characteristic silver gold hair and violet purple eyes. One thing that can be said to have changed the Valyrians was their successful taming of dragons, which they discovered in the 14 Fires, a ring of volcanoes in the Valyrian Peninsula, via the use of magic. It is said magic flowered in the Valyrian freehold, and this people was even able to expand their influence through their dragons and magic. Their supernatural abilities were evidently strongly linked with fire and its usage, especially considering the Valyrians might have had an affinity to tolerate heat, at least to some degree. Although Targaryens are certainly proven to not be fire-resistant in almost all cases, Daenerys has stirred some debate over the extent of her fire-resistant capabilities, especially given recent events in the show, which, of course, doesn't necessarily mean things will transpire in the same fashion in the book series. The White Walkers, on the other hand, are very much resistant to all forms of ice, at least as far as we know. Martin is even noted to have once stated that when asked what substance the others' swords were made of, he answered the following: "Ice, but not like regular old ice. The others can do things with ice that we can't imagine and make substances of it." Where the Valyrians are associated with the likes of fire magic and dragons, especially in terms of the kind of warfare they waged, the presence of the others appears to be accompanied by an intense cold, mist, and/or snowstorms, not only by undead horses, but also by giant ice spiders as big as hounds. Despite the fact that the White Walkers are intricately linked to ice, it is also curious to note that while the others can be killed by obsidian or dragonglass formed weapons, they were seemingly first formed from this very matter, if we consider the vision from Game of Thrones as canon to the books, of course. Despite this, it certainly goes without saying that this dragon steel as the bane of the White Walkers, which we can readily assume to be of a similar obsidian makeup as Valyrian blades, may easily demonstrate that the Valyrians, the very master craftsmen of this weapon, may very well be considered as the bane of the White Walkers. Where Valyrians enslaved the living, the others appear to have enslaved the corpses of the dead. In fact, the only time the others tolerate, quote, the living, is in cases where humans have either given them their own children, as is the case with Craster, or the case of the legendary Night's King, who appears to have married a female White Walker. Otherwise, the only time the White Walkers seemed to use the living was to have their deceased swell their own army of undead. And certainly the White Walkers are amassing a truly substantial and terrifying army of corpses, set to march on Westeros with the apparent purpose of killing the living. Valyrians, on the other hand, used humans as part of their labor force, taking thousands of slaves from across the continent in the blistering hot mines underneath the 14 Flames to search for gold and silver. Slave revolts were common in the mines, but the Valyrians were strong in sorcery and were able to put them down. When there was war, the Valyrians took thousands of slaves, and when there was peace, they bred them. As the power of the freehold grew, so did its hunger for ore, and the Dragon Lords led many conquests to keep the mines full with slaves. It is said that so many perished toiling in the Valyrian mines that the number was so large as to surely defy comprehension. Though the Valyrians were an advanced civilization and the dominant military and cultural power of the known world for a long time, just as the White Walkers terrorized many territories of the known world for a generation. As such, both had an unforgettable existence, and many bore witness to their respective epic demises. If the information we are provided is even remotely correct, the White Walkers' infamous Long Night would have taken place roughly 8,000 years prior to Aegon's conquest, whereas the Valyrian freehold rose some 5,000 years after that, and would have collapsed suddenly roughly 114 years before Aegon the Conqueror invaded Westeros, or 414 years prior to the current events in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, based on the timeline, it would seem that the very existence of the Valyrians and the White Walkers are completely non-related, since the two cultures wouldn't have even known of each other during their respective periods in power over the land. That said, and once again, if Valyrian steel is truly meant to be the bane of the others, is it possible these cold beings are connected with their doom? Did and do the White Walkers / others have or had agents in the lands of Westeros and Essos that were purposefully sent to thwart any possible threats that could hinder their eventual return? These questions, among many others, have certainly been on my mind when looking at points of contrast between these two groups, so I think this is a good point to share my own thoughts on the very subject of this video. First, let me try to answer the following questions. Did the Valyrians come by their unique appearance due to magic? And was it coincidence that the Valyrians found dragons in the 14 Fires volcano range? If legends in both Westeros and the easternmost part of Essos, where humanity was obliged to collectively fight off the threat of the White Walkers, can be deemed to be true, it is quite fascinating that a fire and dragon-centered magical civilization was able to grow and thrive in the form of the Valyrians for such a long time after the end of the Long Night. The manner in which the lore is presented to us, it would almost seem that the early Valyrian farmers simply stumbled on the dragon eggs in their lands and just figured out how to hatch and tame dragons from them. Yet, assuming these people had lived there for so long, why did this event suddenly take place? And how were they able to learn such advanced magic that permitted them to conquer much of the known world? Since Asshai has the reputation of being the epicenter of some truly terrifying and bloody magic, it is my personal hunch that Valyria was created as a sort of insurance policy should the White Walkers ever seek to make a reappearance and attempt to conquer the known world. Is it so hard to believe that Shadowbinders or magicians from Asshai The same people who seemingly taught these arts to the likes of Mirri Maz ventured to the warm lands of Valyria and helped shape the powerful civilization as a means to prevent, or at least scare off, the possibility of the White Walkers returning to Westeros. With these thoughts in mind, is it perhaps not so much a coincidence that the White Walkers have made their own reappearance some 400 years after the fall of Valyria, a relatively short period of time in the grand scheme of the history of the known world? On top of this, does it also mean the White Walkers or the Great Other played some role in toppling the Valyrian civilization? I tend to think not, for a few reasons. If anything, Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire have taught us much of the greedy and power-hungry nature of humankind, and it would seem that the Valyrians are no exception. While it might be easy to blame the end of a civilization on evil ex-human frozen creatures, the most likely reason is that the Valyrians were responsible for their own demise. In conquering and enslaving many human civilizations, we can see how the Valyrians came to be little different from the others I believe they were meant to oppose. That is, a race of people hell-bent on conquest. As we know, it was the megalomania of the Valyrians that led to the forming of the Faceless Men in the slave pits of Valyria. While these assassins not only killed their own masters and escaped to help form the city of Braavos, and assuming the Valyrians didn't destroy themselves in an Icarus-like fashion of trying to achieve greater resources in the 14 Flames, I have little doubt that their ex-victims in the Faceless Men sealed the fate of the Freehold. But all that is perhaps best left for another video. Getting back to the topic of this video, another question that fits within the confines of comparing the two groups is, why did the Valyrians halt their invasion from penetrating into Westeros? Could the fact that the White Walkers once existed in the lands of Westeros act as a deterrent? Or did maybe some deep-seated knowledge that the White Walkers would one day return to the Western lands keep these silver-haired peoples from venturing there? Some Targaryens were known for their prophetic dreams. Perhaps they weren't the only Valyrians with this ability. This is certainly something that many out there have posited, and it wouldn't shock me either if this was the case. Now, I've spent quite a significant portion of the time speaking ill of the White Walkers, so perhaps I should offer a final, perhaps more sympathetic take on their existence. Following their misbegotten creation by the Children of the Forest as weapons to fight the living, it is evident that they survived their original defeat and retreated to the land of Always Winter. While the White Walkers return a respectfully short time in the grand scheme of things after the end of Valyria, it is perhaps possible that the demise of Valyria somehow affected different seasons around the world, including the far north. What if, for instance, the White Walkers' adoptive homeland is in fact dying, or no longer hospitable, or perhaps similarly to Valyria, the land of forever winter witnessed their own doomsday event, and some of the survivors are only now carrying out their own journey to invade Westeros in a roughly similar way to the Targaryens after the fall of Valyria. Certainly George R. R. Martin taking on a more sympathetic approach towards the White Walkers would be a bit of a surprise in my books, but as the old saying goes, never say never, and George is certainly one writer who likes to surprise his fans quite a bit. But this is where you folks come in. Do you think one can make any reasonable associations between the Valyrians and the White Walkers? Are the White Walkers indeed the killing machine the Children of the Forest seem to have created in the show, or is there a more nuanced issue at play here? Please do let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, folks, I will leave things at that for this video. As always, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoyed. And as always, I will see you all next time.